people who can work on the tech so that it'll be available for them to fix the society problems. So the questions that I came up with, and this is, I grouped them into things, is for an initial set of topics that I'd love to hear y'all's thought on, and then we'll break out a little bit, have some discussions in a small. So the first one is enforcement. If we're using technology and AI, it's accelerating the rate of people doing a thing in the world. I have a job that is totally focused on the fact that there is an enforcement. But some of the strategies around law enforcement intervention, prosecutive intervention, aren't impacting people in the right way. And so I wanted, as a start, to get folks' thoughts on how is this a thing that's coming up, maybe, and the things that you're seeing. What are thoughts that you have about here's strategies that we've used that help eliminate this a little bit more. You heard in the last panel about, for example, arresting people who are in an exploitation situation in order to work up the chain to try to get bigger prosecutions and how that isn't particularly effective. So you have two choices. Raise hands and yell things out, or you can use the microphone and I'm happy to repeat stuff. But if folks have thoughts about why technology interacting with this current bias might make things that we see that are bad worse. And again, you don't have anything positive about technology or AI, Microsoft Belt. You can really just say, well, this is the thing that scares me so much. Maybe it doesn't keep you awake at night, but at least stresses you out in the afternoon.
One of the things that I throughout this, sorry. One of the things throughout this it's okay, now we're good. Throughout this conference, one of the things that just keeps percolating a little bit here and a little bit there, but is the confluence of sex work and trafficking. And my fear is that, and I understand that there's people within the movement that believe all sex work and all is exploitative. And so this isn't necessarily to say one is right or the other, but my concern is that the confluence is going to be exacerbated by AI without the voices of those who believe that that sex work is work and that that's their choice being part of the conversation. And so I am really worried that what is, I think, a marginalized community, even within our movement, is going to become further marginalized as the people who have honestly access to people like you tend to be the people that believe sex work is exploitative in all of its forms. And so that's one of my fears.
Yeah, and I think, it's a significant idea to express that if technology is accelerating the ability to intervene in, let's say, ambiguous situations where it might be consensual sex or it might not, and technology platforms or law enforcement is able to intervene without ever truly knowing, that now they'll be able to intervene very quickly without ever knowing, and then they'll never have to figure it out. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, all right. So, throughout this conference, it's been a very good conference so far, meeting you and meeting everybody and having a good conversation. Again, not to disrespect the work that everybody is doing, because we all kind of address this issue. But everything always comes back to me is the core. Like, how do we address the elephant in the room? How do we get the information to the people that it's affecting so that they can use it to not become that victim or to not be this problem? Or, when we're talking about this bias, how do I even understand not, deal with my issues to not even have to deal with this? These are issues, but how do we get to the core of getting this information to people that they can use to better themselves? I always say if the world was perfect, every government would really make family and children priority to make sure that they're dealing with their health issues, to eliminate the vulnerabilities that creates this mess that we're in.
Yeah, that there are gonna be maybe a bunch of tools built that'll be really effective, and they won't be reaching the people who could use them the most effective. And who gets it. That's a little lead in to the small group discussion. There's another comment there, and then we'll jump to group exclusion, which I'd love to hear folks all on.
Yeah, I have, building on both of those comments and these three areas of cause for concern, I'm wondering, one of the things that's also percolating for me is like, what is the proper role of a partnership with government, broadly defined, to promote justice and freedom, as opposed to policing, surveillance, criminalization, et cetera, which we know happens, and it happens in all the ways you mentioned about the Black freedom struggle and racial disparities and so forth. But like, I can imagine like a government partnership for enforcement bias, right, which has been happening in criminal justice reform around race and racism issues, not nearly to the extent that many of us would want. And then the idea, like, to a government response to group exclusion could be to provide, right, some kind of digital access, universal digital access, smartphones for everybody, right? Like, I mean, there are ways in which that could be a resource provision that government, both local, state, and federal could do. And then privacy and security, there are laws that could be passed to sort of promote that, so that the most vulnerable people's data, right? Which, you know, we need in some ways, but could also be a way to surveil and to police and to criminalize. So I'm wondering like how a private company like Microsoft, as a partner to the movement, navigates the government, which is coming for you too, right, in your own ways, as a potential other partner in the movement, centering justice and liberation, right? It's a big question, but like, I'm wondering, like, how do you think, you're a private company, we're nonprofits and NGOs, civil society organizations, government's another entity. How do you see your role navigating that?
Yeah, and I'll say, again, I haven't been selected by anyone to represent Microsoft as a company, and now I just will say some things that I've heard. So I think one of the key pieces of how we would do that is that Microsoft creates consortium. And there's this whole open letter around ethical principles on AI that Microsoft is co-signatory to, but many other civil rights and civil liberties organizations are co-signatories as well. They sign on with their, I think, track record and history of values, and we sign on with the fact that we have many, many lobbies and can influence people very strong. And putting those two things together ends up creating the type of legislation that folks want to see, or most recently that you see an executive order on AI, which, not shockingly, the language on the White House executive order website matches to a great extent some of the things that you see on the the Office of Responsible AI at Microsoft. Because many of these values are built out of community collaboration and the key pieces of what folks want us to be doing out in the community. And then we try to drive those into government legislation, in large part because we think we'll have a competitive advantage. People trust us more. We will take the hits when things go wrong better than other companies. And ultimately, in a fair and constrained playing field, we'll do the best. That we have brought together the right group of people. Other folks will falter, people won't trust them, people won't want to have their data on their platforms, and will end up being successful. So I think that's a big part of it, that we have to listen and collaborate with others. And then, you know, our president, our CEO gets pretty loud in DC and at the UN and at Davos about the need for really clear guidelines and rules about how technology is used. Just to jump ahead, because I want to make sure that we have some time for the next one, around privacy and security. This is a thing that honestly comes up in my world a lot more than I've heard it here. And I've been surprised because everyone's been so positive and nice. But there is the possibility that the collection of data and the acceleration of sort of customized offerings to people in the world means that folks can reverse engineer who these things are for and how to target them, that bad actors will use that level of data against other folks, that there's this idea of networked data that's like, oh, I have a bunch of information about how people shop, and you have a bunch of information about people's finances, and we don't necessarily need to put those together because we both want to be able to sell them. We can network that data to sell it to a third person, and that third party might be a bad actor. Or on the other side, if there's a system that's biased, it might be a government actor that we don't necessarily want to know and target everything. Because they might guess I'm going to do a bad thing, but maybe I'm not going to do a bad thing. Now, me and my friends are having all of our Instagrams sucked up into some government cloud somewhere. But for folks who are really concerned about this, working with survivors and people at risk all the time, how does this issue of privacy, security, is this a thing that it comes up a lot when you think about how much technology you're going to bring into your work and how much AI?
Really, you trust me with this? I don't know how much in terms of my work, but there was a panel earlier that they were talking about scraping the data. And, you know, my immediate thought, again, you're pulling data, you don't know who is actually identified as the victim, whose data you're just pulling. And I'm thinking, well, what if insurance companies get hold of that data and run those numbers through people applying for insurance and just start denying them? Because now you're at higher risk for medical because of the work that you're doing. So we're just going to deny you. And I do think someone spoke about, we've seen that happen in banking already, right? That the algorithms that were developed to identify bad actors in the banking system, I forget John, I think she's in here, but that has had unintended consequences on a whole myriad of things. And so I think insurance is and health insurance and access to governmental programs, all of that, when you have people's phone numbers, you can run those through a whole set of databases and identify who is engaging in sex work, who's been a victim of trafficking, and then start making massive decisions around their life simply because you've scraped data based on a phone number.
Yeah, and there's the possibility that your decision isn't even visible connected to that phone number. You just ask, hey, is this person a high insurance risk or not? And it says they are a high risk. You don't know why, but the robot told me that, so I believe it. Yeah, significant issue. Anyone else on that topic?
Hello. Hi. Yeah. Speaking of predictive, this is a question that I tend to ask a lot. Probably less relevant in this one than others, but to what degree is it a concern that a lot of the training data we use are all in English or North American context, and that is extrapolated to the entire globe? And you know, just because something is happened here doesn't mean it's happening anywhere else.
Yeah, I think that it makes a clear connection for me in the different levels of data privacy that exist here versus other countries. So the models might be built off of English, and then there's some sort of parallel one that's a translation. But if it's pulling things from the internet, what about in developing countries where there's just not as many websites to learn the things that you're trying to learn? And maybe the data isn't as private in those other countries, so now it's pulling in lots of really private data and it doesn't know because of the United States and in English. That data wasn't so private, but now, you know, we know all the medical information from someone because maybe there's a national health system and it posts that stuff online, which it shouldn't sometimes. So, yeah, there are a number of risks to privacy and to the accuracy of how this data gets processed in a non-Western or non-English context. All right, so the next thing that I wanted to do was have conversations. We've got a few minutes for folks to think about. And again, please feel free to go hard at this and be like, this is the worst and dystopian, whatever kind of ideas that you have, because I think that it's an important counterbalance and it's things that we think about all the time. But this, to your point, which organizations win and lose when technology becomes the focus of anti-trafficking. So there are some organizations that are well-heeled, they're built with folks that are mostly, you know, English-speaking, raised in the United States, have access to a lot of capital, things like that. The second one, how does reliance on technology impact the way programs are run? So there are some survivor leaders who I work with, and they're like, there are all these programs and they're built up in all these ways, and my outcomes beat theirs 10-1 because I'm talking with each person individually as a human being. So every time that you try to build this system, screening tool and stuff like that, you could have just hired me and a bunch of my, you know, lived experience folks to come in, and we could have talked to all these people. You would have saved yourself $1 million, and you'd actually get more folks in the service. And then the third one is just what might we get wrong? And I think the issue around, you know, excluding people or misidentifying folks who are in situations of sex trafficking is one, but what might we get wrong in we just go in a wrong direction and this doesn't actually help us. So this part, this includes me. So if you will turn to each other and the people around you, and if you have other things that you think, and this is even worse, feel free to discuss those as well. So we've got a few minutes more to do that, but then we'll reconvene.
We're skipping the narrative.
Yeah, I don't know when branding, so I'm gonna check.
I love your presentation. I love your presentation. I love the way that like you formatted it. It's very like clear, and easy to understand. Great. It's the best.
I will, of course, credit all of the layout and
Yes.
functions to someone else. He created a template deck for me. But yeah, thanks for the illusion.
It's very clear, so kudos to them.
Should just mute this for a second.
What company? That table, takeaway?
So some of the takeaways we discussed were basically how technology really overlooks the populations that don't have access to internet and cell phones, which is huge. And we talked about also communities and the people who may be in situations of trafficking that don't have access to any cell phones and are restricted in the way they can use technology. And then as far as organizations that are winning and losing, we thought that older, larger organizations might not be as fast moving and have access to the same level of resources or ability to change, and that would include also government. And then that the ones winning would be technology companies in the end, so.
We did to a great extent, when it comes to technology, stack the deck in favor of technology companies. It's a thing that we clearly do while trying to help. If you could pass it over to this table, love to hear from that side. Turn the microphone on and count to 3, then it'll work.
Okay, so we spoke about a few different things. One thing we spoke about is how technology makes certain things a game changer for us. So like, for example, being able to go through lots and lots of data to find trends and to be able to do a lot more than you could do manually before. We did also touch upon accessibility for folks that don't have technology or don't have access to technology. We also spoke about for how nonprofits or other organizations, it's important to think about technology because the criminal networks are using technology. And so if you're not using technology yourself, how do you outpace them? So those are the highlights.
Yeah, great. And we'll go to this table last.
So we also talked about larger, more established organizations being the winners. And then we just talked a little bit about there is a time and place where in-person adult is needed, and that when we are speaking with children in particular, many of them can't mention safe adults that they would go to. And so I think there's a fear, certainly on my part, that our over-reliance on, and I totally respect kids teaching to kids, and I think there's a really important role for that, but the over-reliance on that or on technology to provide therapy and information potentially further distance youth from finding safe adults in their communities that they can go to if and when they actually need to utilize them.
Yeah, that it would be built into the habit or the structure that's not even the thought to go to safe adults.
And a backup is what happens when the power goes out? How do we, we got all this technology, the power goes out. Where do I still stay connected?
Yeah, not sure if folks heard about the government Navy breach where so many of the folks connected to the Navy were working remotely. There was some sort of breach. Now they can't access any of their files, and you literally have hundreds of thousands of people around the country that for the first time have a new return to work policy, which is you can't open up a PDF document that's on your computer someplace because we don't have secure networks to do that anymore. That's a real thing. If you rely on that technology, it can't function all the time. So thanks for what everyone contributed. I will share that out. One of the comments that was mentioned before was we're talking about a thing that's like a massive dissertation level topic, and we had like 40 minutes to talk about it. I use distributed computing for the wisdom of all of you to do all of the processing yourself. But again, one of the reasons that I'm here and that I stay connected to the anti-trafficking community, even though it's not the specific focus of all of the work that I do now, is because I get really excited by all the wisdom that comes together at meetings like this. And I've seen the power of positive impact and misapplied technology both. And so whatever I, as an individual, and I've gotten a bunch of requests for LinkedIn and things like that, please feel free to do that. Whatever I can do to be helpful in connecting you with the support that you need, or helping transmit the voice of either yourself, your organization, or the folks in the communities you serve into the people who are making the decisions about technology. I'm happy and excited to do that. So with that, I will say you are first in at the fact that there are beef and chicken empanadas over there. And then there's gonna be a brief break while folks come and get coffee. They're still talking, so you get first dibs on all that stuff. But then we'll reconvene over in the other room, share out on some of the takeaways, and then do the wrap up for today. Thanks so much.